Hello. Today we're going to talk about inverse functions, and I'm going to speed through this because I'm hiding in a closet and it's about 15 minutes before the bell rings. So I'm hoping to get through all of this in 15 minutes. All right, so we're going to talk about inverse functions, and first thing is, what is an inverse function? Well, it's a function that undoes the original function. For example, we all have a way of tying our shoes, and if we tie our shoes, we could call that a function. So what would be the inverse function of tying our shoes? Well, the inverse function would be untying our shoes, because it undoes the original function of tying our shoes. So if we look at inverse functions from a mathematical point of view, and we consider the function f of x equals 2x minus 5, if we take any value of x and plug it into f of x, what happens to that value of x? Well, first we multiply it by 2 and then we add 5. So something that would undo that would involve subtraction and division. The notation for f inverse of x is looks like a negative exponent. This reads f inverse of x. Oops. I hate when that happens. So f inverse of x. That's what that means. You have to be careful. This is not 1 over f of x. That is not true. So that's a common mistake. Please avoid it. Well, to talk about inverse functions, we have to talk about one-to-one functions. A function that's one-to-one has for every input, we have one unique output. And that's a y value. To put it another way, if every time we plug in a value of x, we need to get a unique value of y. The same y value will never appear more than once. A one-to-one function is special because only one-to-one functions have inverse functions. So here's an example. If we want to determine if f of x is a one-to-one function, I have these 4 points. I have 7, 3, 8, negative 5, negative 2, 11, negative 6, 4. If I take a look at this, I have no duplicate x's and no duplicate y's. So this is a one-to-one function. And it does have an inverse. And the inverse function would be 3, 7, negative 5, 8, 11, negative 2, and 4, negative 6. So this would be my inverse. Here's one for you to try. Take a minute, think about this. Is this a one-to-one function? All right, if I take a look at it, I have one unique input, but if you look, I have 2 y values that are the same. So this is not a one-to-one function, and there is no inverse function. So what does that look like graphically? Well, we have something called the horizontal line test. Let me grab my little laser. Okay. If I look at this and draw horizontal lines, there is nowhere where I get 2 values. So this function here on the left is one-to-one, and it has an inverse function. However, if I look at the function g of x on the right, if I draw a horizontal line, I only have one y value here, But as I move down the function, there are places where I have two or even three y values. So function g of x doesn't have an inverse, and it's not one-to-one. So since functions and their inverse functions have the same numbers in their ordered pairs, if we just reverse the orders, their graphs are reflections of each other across this line y equals x. And inverse functions are symmetric around that line. We say they're symmetric about the line y equals x. And here's another thing. F inverse of x is equal to f inverse of f of x, which is just going to be equal to x. So if we have an inverse function and we compose it with the original function or vice versa, the result will just be x. All right, so here's the steps to find an inverse function. First, we change f of x to y, then we switch x and y, solve for y, and then change back to f inverse of x. I knew you were going to want an example, so here we go. Back to our function we talked about in the beginning. F of x equals 2x minus 5. If you look here at a graph of this, it is a one-to-one function, so it does have an inverse. So my first step was to change f of x into y. Second step is to switch x and y. Third step, solve for y. And then change y back into f inverse of x. Next example. I have f of x equals negative x squared plus 4. Find f inverse of x. Well, if you look here, this function doesn't pass the horizontal line test. Passes the vertical line test, but not the horizontal line test. So it's a function, but it doesn't have an inverse. The only way I could make that have an inverse would be to restrict the domain. Another example. I have f of x equals x minus 2 cubed, and I want to find f inverse of x. If you look here, this function does pass the horizontal line test, so it is a one-to-one function, and it does have an inverse function. So let's go ahead and find it. Switch f of x into y. Switch x and y around. Solve for y. And then change y back into f inverse of x. And there we have our inverse function. All right, here's one for you to try. Pause the video. When you're ready to start, try again. Or check your answer, don't try again. Okay, so this was a little mean, but it is a one-to-one function. If I were to graph this, it's a rational function that is one-to-one. So let's solve it. Y equals 4x minus 3 over 2x plus 1. Switch our x and y around. Okay, now we have to solve for y. This is where it gets tricky. I'm going to multiply both sides by 2y plus 1. And then I'm going to distribute the x to both of my values. And then I want to move all of my y's to one side of the equation. Oops. Hold on, I want to erase that. What a wimpy eraser. Okay, minus 4y equals negative x minus 3, and then I'm going to factor out a y on the left-hand side. And that leaves me with negative x minus 3 divided by 2x minus 4. So f inverse of x is the function on the left. Okay, so that was a little mean. Try the next one. This should be a little bit easier. Pause the video when you're ready, restart it, and check your answer. Okay, this is a one-to-one function. It's just a linear function, so let's go ahead and check. Y equals 5, 6x minus 3/4. Switch our x and y around. What do I want to do first? I'm going to add 3/4. And then multiply everything by 6/5. Six times 3 would be 18, 5 times 4 would be 20, 18 over 20 simplifies down. To 9/10. Done. One more for you to try. Okay, so this one, it is not one-to-one, and so therefore it doesn't have an inverse. That's it for today. That's got to be a record, 19 slides in, I don't know, just probably less than 20 minutes.